All right, so your next step is going to be painting your positive space areas. It's pretty easy to figure out where your positive space areas are because we marked them previously. And they're the areas that aren't painted. Well, some of your areas, especially in a very large object space, you're not going to paint. So you are going to paint only the object and only in the boxes marked positive space. So I am going to start with just some of my boxes up here. And you will also notice that I am painting with the illusion of form. So I'm trying to continue to create illusion of form in my boxes. And I am using non-local color. So I'm not worried about the original color of the object. I am just worried about creating that illusion of form. So I'm painting using yellow right now. You can paint using whatever paint you have available. If you're working with watercolor for this project, then obviously you're going to want to work with watercolor. If you're working with acrylic paint for this project, then obviously you're going to want to work with acrylic paint. Keep looking at your reference. You know where the shadows are and you know where the highlights are. And if you're working with watercolor, make sure that you dry your brush off every once in a while to just paint with the paint that's on your surface. This is also very helpful for acrylic paint. So those of you who are working with acrylic paint, one thing about watercolor is if you paint right up next to an area that is wet, your watercolor is going to bleed. So this is wet. I'm not going to paint this. All right. That's how it works. But I am working with my 3-color color scheme here, my limited color palette, and I'm adding shadows in just like I did when I was painting the sphere. With acrylic paint, if your paint's wet, you can continue to paint in another area. It's not going to bleed, it's not going to affect it. But since this is wet, I can't finish painting this area, so I'm going to move on to another positive space area, this one right over here. Again, I'm painting with the illusion of form. Later on, I'll go back and I'll erase those plus signs. Right now, I'm just going to let them go because they are in my negative space. And in all of the positive space boxes, I'm only painting my objects. Remember, you are only painting your object or the positive space in the boxes marked positive space. So up here, there is no positive space. So this is left white. It's all negative space. There's nothing to paint. Up here, there is no positive space because there's no object. So it's all negative space. And I'm not painting negative space today, so it's left white. Here, there are objects that are positive space, and it's marked positive space. So I paint the positive space. You can always ask yourself, first, is it marked positive space? And then second, is there a positive space object in it? If there is a positive space object in an area marked positive space, then you are painting. So that one's finished. This one I can go back to and finish painting that. I work with small amounts of paint at a time because it allows me to have the most control. So that might help you as well. Okay, so this is done and this is done. Now I would move on to the next row and do my positive space area. So I would do this one, skip, do this one, skip, do this one. But let me show you in a more complicated area that maybe you didn't have a lot of negative space, so you didn't do a lot of painting. So this is marked positive space and there's an object in it. This is negative space. This is a positive space area. So I would paint this. But what happens in here? So if this was positive, this is negative, and this is positive. So I skip this one and I paint this one. And here I'm going to paint with some different colors because I want to show that this is a different object. So I'm going to pick up some red as my medium tone. You'll see that I'm also using brown and green for shadows and some blue for shadows. I'm not worried about realistic color here. I'm worried about realistic value and consistency across an area. Okay, so now this box is done. So I would skip the next one because it's a negative space box. There's no negative space in that area. And I would paint this area here. Continuing the value and idea of what I've got going on in this box, I would paint in this box. And then I would skip this one because it's negative space, and I would paint the next one. And then down here, this is a negative space box. Then I would do the positive space. This is a negative space box, and I would do the positive space. You can see this is a negative space box. All right, so we have previously marked our positive space boxes, so you should be able to figure out which ones you are painting. You are only painting the positive space, so the actual objects, and you're only painting in the positive space boxes. Do not paint inside the negative space boxes, even if there's an object in there. Ignore those. If you have to put a piece of paper over those, put a piece of paper over those. Ignore the ones that are negative space. In fact, ignore all negative space today. You are just painting positive space right now. All of your negative space areas are already painted. So ignore all negative space. You're just doing positive space, and you're just doing positive space in the positive space boxes. Okay? You can do this. If you need help, we're around.